Claire MacNeil is a lawyer with legal aid and legal counsel for the Disability Rights Coalition. She recently fought the Human Rights Tribunal about people with disabilities kept in Emerald Hall at the Dartmouth Hospital for years, even though they were medically approved for discharge. So, Claire, can you please explain in brief the Human Rights Tribunal with which you were recently involved?
In brief, and I have 5 or 6 minutes to do this, so it should be no problem.
5.
I'll give you a minute or 6.
Okay. So, the human rights complaint wasn't filed precipitously. It followed many, many years of advocacy and activism and talking to government and trying to resolve the problem of exclusion and segregation in any way possible other than litigation. But at the end of the day, and I represented the Disability Rights Coalition, which is a cross-disability group that is dedicated to making human rights happen for people with disabilities in Nova Scotia, they decided that that was the only way. And it's sort of, I'll take you through the process, but the purpose of the human rights complaint is basically to demand accountability from the Nova Scotia government. So it's not to, somehow design the solution. The solutions, from all the work we've done, we can talk about that. I think the solutions are there. I don't think it's something that needs more reports or more studies or more kind of research. I think it's being done elsewhere. Including people in community, all people, including people with disabilities. So the purpose of the human rights complaint is to force government to meet their legal obligations and to provide community-based options for people with disabilities. So that's where the thing kind of started. And we heard from Jen. She spoke about the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that has been endorsed by the Canadian government, the way our process works, so it's not immediately enforceable in Nova Scotia, even though we say it is the law. And so there is Article 19, which really spells it out, and you may say, well, doesn't that answer the question? And unfortunately, the answer is no. So we used the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act, which says that certain treatment violates people's human rights, that the government can be held to account for that. And so we kind of framed the case of exclusion and segregation based on this notion of discrimination, also an aspect of human rights in addition to Article 19. I think that it's beyond a controversy that the system that exists in Nova Scotia is inadequate and it's inappropriate. Even the government representatives who testified before the Board of Inquiry admitted that. So what divides us is whether that's discrimination, whether that meets the technical requirements for discrimination under the Human Rights Act. Really what the Disability Rights Coalition is, in broad terms, what it's advocating for is a person-centered approach. And even the government-funded reports support that notion, although, there's lots of argument on the details about what that means. In terms of the discrimination, there's no question that the government's actions and inactions over decades have adversely affected people with disabilities. There is a huge disadvantage to the system as it exists, but the question for the Board of Inquiry that's currently deliberating on this and trying to make up its mind about at the first stage is whether this disadvantage is sufficiently connected to disability to constitute discrimination. So you may ask, what is the nature of the discrimination? And it is the unnecessary institutionalization of people with disabilities. And in Nova Scotia, it's not well known. A really obvious example is the Nova Scotia Hospital, because it's right here in town and we know where it is, and it's a provincial institution, draws people from all over the province. But scattered around our province are 9 large institutions and many sort of mid-range institutions, 50 people or around that number. They're, kind of tucked away in out-of-the-way spots. One of the individual complainants in this proceeding spent a very long time at, starting from the age of 14, was an institution located on a place called County Home Road near Waterville. And it's called County Home Road because that's where the poorhouse used to be. And so it went from being a poorhouse to now it's a road that has only two neighbors on it. One is the RRC, which is a regional rehabilitation center exclusively for people with disabilities. It's a segregated, isolated place, and a jail. So that's their neighbor. Some would say not too much separates them physically and otherwise. So that's kind of the history. And part of what we're claiming as well is that the nature of the discrimination, it's disability that's at its root, but also poverty. If we all had $1 million, we wouldn't choose to live in a place like the RRC in Waterville. We'd find a place in the community. So poverty really does underpin our human rights complaint as well. So what else did I want to say? I also wanted to say that the case is also about wait lists. It's about these decades-long, in some cases, wait lists that, well, they now admit that they have wait lists. There was a time when community services kind of didn't even really admit to that, but I'm going back a few decades. But now there's wait lists, so we know there are wait lists, but we don't know how long people are going to have to wait. We don't know what's going to be at the end of the road when they get to the top of the wait list. And in the meantime, they're in inadequate and inappropriate settings. And also forced dependency on friends and family in situations where, oftentimes we hear about parents who are ill or elderly, they're really struggling to keep it together, and there really is no light at the end of the tunnel. They'd like to have their loved ones settled in a home and where they're able to live independently in the community, and it's a really tough struggle for a lot of families who aren't able to make those kind of plans because community services has them on a kind of indefinite waiting game. So I just wanted to do one. I just wanted to say one more thing, and that relates to what I just said. That it's not really about knowing what the problem is. You're all here because you know what the problem is, I assume, or that you want to learn more about it. And so I'm just saying that we're trying to mobilize as well people to approach their elected representatives in Nova Scotia, starting with the Premier, and to let the Premier know that action needs to be taken. Right now, you don't need to continue to fight, pay for lawyers and litigate this thing. They can stretch this human rights complaint out for years longer. We filed in 2014. They've already taken us to the Court of Appeal twice. This could go on for a very long time in terms of the legal process, but it could be solved tomorrow if we had a legislative multi-year commitment to funding the programs that were recommended and endorsed by the government in the roadmap in 2013. So this is just a quick call out. I'm sorry I'm taking an extra minute. Just to say, if everybody in this room were to write the Premier tomorrow and give him that message, I think that would have a big impact.
Thank you.